Welcome to part 2 of Before Dookie, How Punk Became Pop. If you haven't seen the first part, the link is in the description. Last time we looked at pop punk's evolution from the Ramones to Husker Du and the Replacements. There were pop influences, goofy covers, and a load of melodic hardcore. This episode will feature everything from the Californian punk scene revival, through the independent punk labels of the 90s, right to Green Day's Dookie. Enjoy. Depending on your point of view, Bad Religion either destroyed or saved the South Californian punk scene. By the mid-80s, the melodic hardcore boom had fizzled out. Bad Religion bassist Jay Bentley reflected. Every punk rock band in LA was gone. There was no place to play anymore. It basically run its course. You go and play shows and people would be fighting. This is not fun anymore. The key scene bands were either embroiled in gang violence, edging towards a more thrash metallic sound, or, in the case of Bad Religion, releasing an album so unpunk that the band became pariahs in their own scene. They went from the melodic hardcore of tracks like We're Only Gonna Die to the keyboard-led prog of 1983's Into the Unknown. Such was the negative reaction to the sonic shift that the band called it quits. But then, in 1986, Bad Religion reformed, shifted back to their original style, newly refined, and created perhaps the most influential punk album of the late 80s, 1988's Suffer. Their sub-2-minute blast of righteous melodic hardcore, rife with 3-part vocal harmonies, were exactly what SoCal punk needed. Said Kerrang in 2006, Suffer is the sound of a genre screwing its head back on straight and concocting a mix of everyman politics, humanitarian beliefs, with combustible indignation. While Bad Religion were punk in the political themes present in their songs, their music was inspired by their pop-punk forefathers, the band citing Elvis Costello, The Jam, and the Ramones as influences. Suffer revived the stagnating scene. Most SoCal punk that came in the aftermath referred to the record as a genre touchstone, so much so that out-of-the-loop English journalists in the mid-90s thought that Bad Religion were ripping off Green Day and The Offspring instead of the other way round. On a European tour in 1988, NoFX's Fat Mike was intending on breaking his band up to instead tour as a roadie with Operation Ivy. His plans were abandoned after hearing Suffer for the first time. It was the best thing I'd ever heard. It was a style of melodic punk rock that walked the perfect line between pop and hardcore. I listened to the tape 10 times that night. I thought that if I tried, maybe I could come close to writing something almost as good. Maybe NoFX deserved another shot. Suffer was also Bad Religion's first record to be released and distributed by guitarist Brett Gowitz's Epitaph label, which soon became the most important record label in 90s punk. Originally founded in 1981 with the release of Bad Religion's debut EP, Epitaph was named after a line in a King Crimson song. Confusion will be my epitaph. Greg Gaffin said in 1997, Epitaph, what a great idea, because Epitaph is in a sense a record of a lifetime. These grooves in the vinyl will be our epitaph. The label had gone bankrupt due to Gowitz's issues with heroin in the mid-80s, having only released Bad Religion's pre-Suffer records, as well as the Vandals' Peace Through Vandalism EP. Upon reforming in 1986, the label was revived. Suffer sold 4,000 copies on its initial run, which is extremely impressive for a tiny no-name label. Bad Religion's follow-up in 1989 sold 12,000 copies. This gave Gowitz capital to sign and release other bands' records, early signings being L7, NoFX, Pennywise, and then eventually The Offspring and Rancid. There's a war
down between my breasts and mine. I don't want no war.
Epitaph was not the only independent punk label that would prove influential. Also operating in California was Lookout Records, founded by Larry Livermore in 1987. Livermore was an older generation punk from the San Francisco East Bay area. Having been 30 years old when the first wave of punk rock bands hit California, his label was named after his punk band, The Lookouts. They formed in 1985 with a couple of punk kids, 40-year-old bassist Kane Kong and 12-year-old Frank Edwin Wright III on drums. The latter later would join another, more well-known Lookout band. His alias changed to simply Trey Cool. Lookout Records' first significant release was their third, Operation Ivy's Hectic EP. 924 Gilman Street was and still is a non-profit, all-ages, collectively organised music club that was home to some of the region's most important up-and-coming punk bands in the late 80s. This included Operation Ivy, who became local heroes because of their raucous live shows. While others were fine to rely on popified hardcore, Operation Ivy added upstroke guitar chords to the mix that recalled British second-wave ska bands like The Specials and The Selecter. This new style was ska punk. As well as being one of the best-selling bands on Lookout Records, Operation Ivy inspired a whole new genre of bands. Sublime, No Doubt, Mighty Mighty Bosstones, and the whole third-wave ska revival owe a lot to songs like Unity. Green Day also regularly cover their song Knowledge live. Operation Ivy split after their sole album, Energy, in 1989, but guitarist Tim Armstrong and bassist Matt Freeman would go on to form Rancid in 91. To try and document the Gilman scene, iconic punk rock zine Maximum Rock and Roll compiled some of the best bands on the 1987 Turn It Around compilation. I used to get in a lot of arguments with people who thought that this was no new revolution. To me it was. It was a new thing that grew out of, but was separate from, original punk. It was positive and upbeat and creative, rather than nihilistic and destructive. In the crowd for a great deal of these shows between 86 and 89 was a teenage Billy Joe Armstrong and Mike Dirnt, energized by the raw punk rock so much that they needed to take part and formed Sweet Children in 1986. They would later be signed to Lookout and become significantly more well known by another, more ivy-coloured name. Another band that occasionally could be seen at the Gilman Street venue was Chicago's Screeching Weasel. Their form of pop punk was a hardcore-dominated version of the Ramones, known by most as Ramonescore. Their first album of note was 1988's Boogada Boogada Boogada, its odd title named after the noise a friend of the band would make upon seeing an attractive woman. While in love with the Ramones, the bands weren't too keen on another classic 70s group, as expressed in I Hate Led Zeppelin. Lookout Records later released 3 of their albums in the 90s. The first, My Brain Hurts in 91, came after a brief hiatus, where their style shifted even closer to the Ramones. This album includes their classic song, Guest List. The song deals with the very pop-punk subject of falling for a girl at a punk rock show. The Girl Next Door from their 1993 Radio Blast EP was later covered by Blink-182 on their initial demo. Their early sound, as a whole, roughly aping Screeching Weasel. Many more bands like the Ergs, Teenage Bottle Rocket, the Lillingtons, and even a really young Green Day also took note from their sound. While Bad Religion, Operation Ivy, and Screeching Weasel were sonically important to the newly revived pop-punk genre, what they weren't was on MTV. Perhaps the first American pop-punk song to be a regular occurrence on music television was Philadelphia's The Dead Milkmen, with their ode to underfunded romance, Punk Rock Girl.
Punk Rock Girl, give me a chance. Let's go slam dance to a dress like Minnie Pearl.
The song follows a date with the increasingly riotous antics of the titular Punk Rock Girl, which concludes with her stealing a car. There's also some not so subtle satire in the fact that the girl is no poor kid from the streets, but a rich suburban teen touristing within punk rebellion.
It makes no sense, your dad is the vice president, rich as the Duke of Earl.
But if the Dead Milkmen could put punk rock on MTV, perhaps it wouldn't be impossible for it to happen again. The most significant event in bringing pop-punk to a commercially practical level in the 90s was Nirvana and their zeitgeist-altering album, Nevermind. While not a pop-punk band in the same way as Green Day or The Offspring, Nirvana had similar influences including Husker Du, The Replacements, and Buzzcocks. While the songs were pop-catchy and rock impactful, what made Nevermind stand out and appeal in a way that for a punk rock band previously wasn't possible was its glossy, Butch Vig production. Vocals weren't buried under layers of distortion, the guitars crunched and shone, while the drums sounded epic. As Kurt Cobain stated in the 1993 book, Come As You Are, looking back on the production of Nevermind, I'm embarrassed by it now. It's closer to a Motley Crue record than it is a punk rock record. Singles Smells Like Teen Spirit, In Bloom, Come As You Are, and Lithium became mainstream ubiquitous in a way that no other punk songs had been before. This is why 1991 is the year punk broke. As stated by Offspring singer Dexter Holland in 2014, Nirvana definitely blew the doors open. All of a sudden you were seeing Smells Like Teen Spirit on MTV, and that video looks like a punk rock show. It looked like when we played Gilman Street in Berkeley. It made everything kind of seem possible. Nirvana made it so that any punkish band with pop appeal could be snapped up and promoted intensely by labels. This included Bad Religion signing to Atlantic, Green Day to Reprise, and the Muffs to Warner Brothers, all signed up in 1993. NoFX frontman Michael Fat Mike Burkett has stated that 1989's S&M Airlines was their first real album, their first release through Epitaph that grasped at a more suffer-inspired direction. By 1992's White Trash, Two Hebes and a Bean, they had hit their stride with their own brand of humorous melodic punk. Bob, an EP track, Kill All the White Man, took Operation Ivy's ska punk and upped it by adding a trumpet.
As the trucks drive by, you can hear the motherfuckers go. We will be rid of him, soon come the day.
While tracks like Sticking in My Eye would inspire future pop-punk jokers like Blink-182, Less Than Jake, Sum 41, as well as Burkett's future project, Me First and the Gimme Gimmes. Though major labels came sniffing around, NoFX preferred to stay punk and with Epitaph. In spite of this, their 1994 album, Punk in Drublic, has sold 1 million copies and remains one of the defining statements in 90s punk. About the time of White Trash, Burkett started releasing other bands' records on his label, Fat Records. First with Lagwagon's debut, Duh, in 1992. These bands would all have sonic similarities to NoFX, but taken in a variety of different directions.
A message to you, Rudy. Fuck you, Rudy! What's up forward?
By the end of the 90s, the label was selling over 1 million records per year. Probably the most important release by Fat Records for the burgeoning pop-punk movement was Disconnected by Face to Face. Originally on the Doctor Strange Records release Don't Turn Back in '92, Fat Wreck remixed and released the song as a single, which was quickly playlisted by K-Rock. In no short time, Disconnected became an alt-rock radio mega hit and kickstarted the pop-punk gold rush in earnest. New York's Jawbreaker moved to the San Francisco Bay Area after their second album Bivouac in '92, due to their tracks like Chesterfield King becoming very popular within the Gilman scene.
I took my car and drove it down the hill by your house. I drove so fast.
They stood out, were college educated, and referenced beat poets in their songs. Said future Green Day guitarist Jason White, "They're really smart, and I think people were sometimes scared to approach them because they seemed like this sort of smart guy band or whatever. And they weren't overly punk rock aesthetically, they had their own style. Their songs were more literate than their contemporaries, but maintaining that melodic bend." The early part of their career was also signified by singer Blake Schwarzenbach's hoarse but powerful vocal delivery,
I kissed the bottle.
which altered dramatically after a voice-saving polyp removal. Said Schwarzenbach, "It was 2 octaves higher. I just had like no grit. It was a pretty unwieldy instrument, and I had to break it back into what I knew is my voice." 1993 through '94 for the band involved national arena tours as the opening band for both Nirvana and Green Day, as well as the release of their opus, 24-Hour Revenge Therapy. Due to the tours, the Gilman punks had started to see Jawbreaker as sellouts, which confused the band, despite being written months before they started to face criticism from the scene. The track Boxcar on Revenge Therapy, and particularly its opening lyrics, perfectly sum up pop-punk's apathy towards punker-than-thou types.
Gonna punk, and I'm telling everyone, take a breath, but never was one.
As much as Jawbreaker sounded like pop-punks, there was just as much influence from The Replacements and R.E.M. Despite this, they quickly became heralded as a potential next Green Day, and were signed to DGC Records for their 1995 Dear You album. They split soon after, but influenced the more emo-tinged pop-punks in their wake, including Alkaline Trio, Saves the Day, The Get Up Kids, and Fall Out Boy. Bar Bad Religion and NoFX, The Offspring were the 90s wave band that had been around the longest. Originally called Manic Subsidal, they formed in 1984 after a riot at a Social Distortion show. By 1992, they had been signed to Epitaph, and their second album, Ignition, was gaining them small-time local success. Their next album, Smash, would be their breakout release. Recorded for $20,000, the songs were more complex and melodic than their previous punk rock releases. From the Middle Eastern or Agent Orange riffage of Come Out and Play,
Hey, man, you're talking back to me. Take them out. Gotta keep them separated.
to the slower Nirvana-esque Self-Esteem. Said their guitarist Kevin Noodles Wasserman in Rolling Stone, "When we were first writing Self-Esteem, I didn't get it at all. The song structure just seemed weird to me. We were used to playing everything really fast as we could, and here was a song that was a little slower." In some kind of karmic changing of the punk rock guard, Smash was unleashed upon the world the day that Kurt Cobain's body was found in his Seattle home. The Offspring were on independent Epitaph. Owner Gowitz used to say that 50,000 copies sold was considered to be punk rock gold, as he believed that his label would never release an album that could earn real gold certification, i.e. 500,000 records sold. Smash was the first Epitaph album to go gold, then platinum, then eventually 6 times platinum. It peaked at number 4 on the Billboard chart. It's still the best-selling independent album of all time. Up until that moment, I didn't really think any of our bands would truly break through. We had some groups on Epitaph that were bigger than others, but none of them had ever crossed over into mainstream acceptance. Not even close. What the Offspring did was leapfrog over everybody. But with success came a backlash. Though the Offspring had built themselves up with over a decade of punk rock toil, the punk rock community was quick to turn their backs on the band. Said Holland in 2014, "Isn't it ironic? You start a punk band because you feel like you're being ostracized. Then your punk band gets big and you get ostracized again." Changing their name from Sweet Children in 1988, Berkeley's Green Day were a more power pop inspired concept than the rest of the bands that frequented Gilman Street. By 1992's Kerplunk album, their second, Green Day were at a level where they were selling out club-sized venues on both sides of the US. Kids related to their songs about long-distance relationships,
'Cause she's 2,000 light years away.
shitty living situations,
Some call it some call it nice.
and classic American literature.
There's a boy who fought his world and now he's getting lazy.
And at release, Kerplunk had gone punk rock gold. In 1993, Green Day moved from Lookout Records to Reprise after a three-way label bidding war between them, Geffen, and Columbia. A move made because the band felt they had outgrown their indie label's distribution capacity. While Kerplunk was a huge success for an independent punk band, their follow-up, Dookie, was beyond anything anyone could have ever expected. MTV started playing the video for the album's lead single, Longview, in February 1994, where by September it was started on heavy rotation. By the next year, Dookie had racked up 3 Billboard Modern Rock #1s, gone multiple times platinum, and won the Grammy for Best Alternative Album. This was unthinkable for a punk band a year previous. Live performances like that at Woodstock 94 helped the band's profile. Millions watched Armstrong have a mud fight with the crowd, and Dirnt have his teeth knocked out by a confused security guard. But the songs are what secured Green Day and Dookie its lasting impact.
Am I just paranoid? Am I just sad?
Basket Case was the big hit, but Longview, with his acid-fried walking bass line, personalized Gen X apathy in a way that spoke directly to the nation's youth.
I'll sit around and watch the tube, but nothing's on.
Armstrong told VH1, "I was just in a creative rut. I was in between houses, sleeping on people's couches. It's a song about trying not to feel pathetic and lonely. I didn't think that masturbation was really seen from the point of view I was looking at it. I was coming from a lonely guy's perspective. No girlfriend, no life, complete loser." Dookie was a huge shift from the melodic hardcore of the bands that had influenced them or part of the Gilman Street scene. To the Gilman Street faithful, Green Day were no longer punk. They were a pop band, and they had the record sales to prove it. But the album would influence the next wave of pop-influenced punk. Everyone from Blink-182 and Newfound Glory to My Chemical Romance, Fall Out Boy, and beyond, furthering what was once punk into an increasingly mainstream accepted direction. 1994 was the apex year commercially for pop punk, with iconic albums in the form of Dookie, Smash, Punk in Drublic, 24-Hour Revenge Therapy, as well as stellar work by the old guard and the up-and-comers, including Bad Religion's Stranger Than Fiction, Rancid's Let's Go, Lagwagon's Trashed, as well as the first Punkorama compilation. Blink-182 would take what had come before and record their debut record, Cheshire Cat, at the tail end of '94, ready to make their take on pop punk to a poppier place on 99's Enema of the State. Pop punk as a genre has come a long way from the Ramones, each band adding their own unique tone, style, and reference points, gradually getting to the point where the punk in the genre's title is mostly irrelevant. Since '94, there have been other landmark albums in the increasingly hard to define genre.
Last good thing I ever saw. Makes me shiver, it makes me shake. Seems that broken hearted love songs are what I'm all about. I'm 2 quarters and a heart down.
She caught him by the mouth.
Jesus Christ! She says I need to grow up!
And many, many more. but none of them have anywhere near the cultural, commercial, or historic impact as Green Day's Dookie, and it's doubtful that any other pop-punk album ever will again. Thanks for watching. Who did I inevitably miss out? Like, comment, and subscribe. If you enjoy my work and want to keep on seeing videos on a semi-regular basis, maybe think about kicking a couple of dollars over on the Trash Theory Patreon. There's great rewards on there, like being able to vote on future videos. That is why there's a new Fugazi video on the horizon. I'd like to thank all my top tier patrons, including new donors John Buha and Paul Boltzmann. You're all awesome. See you next time.